All right, so next I want to talk about the concept of layering. So we've talked about all these different individual targeting options that you guys can use to reach people through the display network. But what many people don't realize is that they can layer multiple targeting options on top of each other to get a more targeted audience. Now, one word of caution I'm going to throw in here before we talk about layering is you have to be very, very careful not to over layer or like layer too many options on top of each other, or else your ads just won't show at all and your audience won't be big enough. So with that being said, there are some different ways that you can layer and still have a really good size audience, and it works out really, really nicely. So I've just shared a chart here, and this is also something you can download in the members area. But these are some different targeting options where you can layer different things like keywords and placements. And what will happen when you layer keywords and placements is that when you're on a specific site, that specific site that you've added as a placement also has to contain the keywords that you've entered in. So it's super, super targeted. And I'm sure you guys can see where it's very easy to make this too narrow of a targeting option. So it's important to have a lot of different placements available when you are layering keyword on top of that. And the way that you go in there and add layering is literally you just add one targeting option and then you add another targeting option to the same ad group. So again, I'm going to walk through this in the demo lessons, but just so you know, it's super straightforward. There's no secret trick. You just go in there and add the different options that you want for that ad group. You can also layer things like audiences with specific age ranges. Demographics is one that's very, very common to layer on top of all of the other targeting options, because a lot of times you know some of the basic demographics. So for example, if you're targeting moms, you know you're going to want to go in there and target people, you want to target moms, parents, you want to target people who are in that age range where you would be a mom. Just things like that are pretty natural and very common to go in and layer on top of other things. Now, I'll just caution you not to go in there. You'll see most of these are just 2 layers. Once you get into like 3 or 4 layers, you're typically getting into where your audience is going to be too small and it's going to be just, it won't show. Your ad just won't show. It won't get any impressions at all. So you can do remarketing, you can do gender, you can do topics, you can do audiences. So basically anything that we've talked about so far, you can create different layers on top of it. So this is very similar to if any of you guys have used Facebook's targeting options, where you can go in there and you can, pick one option for targeting, like maybe interest targeting, and then you can add another layer to narrow your audience. So it's the same concept, very similar concept here. So layering is something that I definitely encourage you guys to use whenever you're trying to really narrow that target audience down a little bit more. So now that we've talked about all the different ways that you can reach people in the display network, we need to talk about how to not reach certain people. We want to make sure that every bit of ad dollars that you are spending through the display network is the most effective. It's being spent on people that are the most likely to convert or eventually become customers. So this is very, very similar to the concept of negative keywords that I talked to you guys about in earlier modules for the search network. So I'm going to just share a few different ways that you can basically quality control where you're showing ads and who you're showing ads to. So the first one is called site category exclusions. And site category exclusions are campaign-wide exclusions that will prevent an ad from appearing on certain placements or websites that don't really align with your message or your tone or what you're trying to accomplish, or maybe it's just really, the type of content that you don't want to be showing up next to. And so these are concepts that are going to range. You can see kind of a screenshot here, but it's going to be anything from gambling to things that are sexually suggestive types of content or mature audiences, even things like error pages or sites that have a lot of tragedy, conflict, political sites, social networks is one. So there's all different types of categories of sites that in a lot of cases, you're going to not want to be showing your ad on those types of sites. And just to kind of share from my experience, for most of our clients, everything you see here, for the majority of them, like most of the individual line items you see are off limits. We exclude a lot of these. So, I mean, just think of, just there's a million different examples, but, an advertiser who is trying to promote a family-friendly service is probably not going to want their ad showing up on, say a really controversial article about, politics or something like that. Or think of a bank or, just conservative types of businesses who just don't really want their ads showing up next to certain types of content. This is how you go in and exclude all these different types of categories so that your ads won't show up next to these types of content. So I highly encourage you, before you ever launch any kind of display campaign, to go into this section. Again, I'm going to walk through this, so I'll show you where this is, but it's in the display network settings there, where you can go in and choose which categories you want to exclude. And there are also other types of exclusions. These are called targeting exclusions that are different from content exclusions. And so targeting exclusions are exclusions that are at the keyword level, the placement level. Interests, audiences, topics, and demographics are all different types of targeting exclusions. So basically any criteria that you can target with, so any of the targeting options that we've talked about, you can also turn around and exclude those specifically. And what this will do is just really help you to weed out just all the junk traffic and views and all that tends to come about from the display network if you're not going in there and very carefully monitoring all of your exclusions. Very similar to the negative keywords. Negative keywords are so important for search, for weeding out bad traffic, irrelevant traffic, and cutting out that wasted spend. And the same exact thing is true for the display network. It's not just keywords. So on the display network, you want to exclude certain placements and different things like that. So from a performance perspective, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more when I talk about optimizing your display campaigns, you can see that certain placements will drive up costs. They won't have any conversions. They'll have a lot higher cost per click. And so you may want to go and exclude those types of placements. And, the other thing that you might be doing is just excluding certain audiences that are not a good fit. So just the same as you're going in there and targeting the ones that you do want to reach, it's important to go in and exclude the ones that you don't. So an age group, for example, if you know your services are best fit for people over 35, then you're going to want to go in and exclude age groups of like 18 to 24 and 25 to 34 and so on. Then also, there are some specific placement exclusions that I almost always recommend to add across the board, pretty much no matter what business you have. And so here's just two examples of those. The first is, it's called AdSense for mobile apps. And if you go in and add this URL under your placement exclusions, it's going to really help to avoid showing up on any of the mobile apps. I don't really recommend advertising on mobile apps, specifically because for one, I have kids, and I know that my kids are always on my phone, playing different games and, doing things on my phone. And when they're on these apps, they are getting bombarded with ads, and ads are being served through the display network, and they click on them constantly, and I have to constantly tell them, don't click on the ads, just X out of them. But I can't tell you how many millions of clicks and how many millions of dollars are wasted from children on these mobile apps clicking on these ads. It is one way to really cut back on any, on irrelevant traffic, because I don't think you're probably selling your products to 2-year-olds. And even if you are, they don't have purchase power. So, you're not reaching the buying, decision maker for any of these toddlers and kids who are on phones, on mobile apps. So that's a big thing that I always recommend to exclude. And then another one is anonymous.google is another placement that you can exclude. And it's hit or miss, but like sometimes, most of the time, in my opinion, anonymous sites are just you don't know. I mean, you don't have any idea what type of site it is or anything like that. And so I prefer to know that type of information. So I just think it's, important to know exactly what it is that you're getting into and where your ads are showing. And so I typically exclude that particular placement. So overall, let me just back up here and just give you guys some overall recommendations. Now that I've shared a lot of different targeting options with you, I just want to give you some starting recommendations for those of you that are just trying to figure out, okay, where do I start? And my answer to that is start with remarketing. That's at the baseline. If you're going to use display, for sure make sure that you have a good remarketing strategy in place and that you're using remarketing ads. And like I mentioned before, we want to be segmenting your remarketing lists. And so that's a good place to start. And then once you have that in place and you want to broaden out and try to reach cold audiences and sort of fill the top of your funnel, then I recommend getting started with managed placements first. So I would start there, and then the next place I would go after that is to use Google's new custom intent audiences, which is really exciting, and I shared that with you during the interest targeting part of the lesson. So those are the places I would start for cold audience. Another recommendation I'm going to leave you with is to always exclude those mobile game placements like I talked about just a second ago. And then one final recommendation when you're setting these campaigns up, which I'll also reiterate in our demo lesson when I walk through a campaign setup, is I typically don't recommend using the option where Google finds new customers for you. When we're going through the campaign setup, I'll show you this, but there's like a checkbox underneath the, like when you're going through the campaign setup, that Google will say, there's like two options where you can allow Google to go out and find new audiences based on the audiences that you've sort of programmed in. And like I've said throughout the rest of this course, I tend to not want to have Google go in and do that for me automatically. I like to have the control over exactly where I want my ad to show. So I just recommend not using that option unless you're just really like at a place where you just really want to scale huge and just reach as many people as possible. Otherwise, I would not use that option for when you're just getting started. So those are some just basic recommendations for you. And in the next lesson, what we're going to do is go ahead and talk about all the different ad formats and some design tips for you as you get started actually creating your display ads to run on the network. So I'll see you guys in lesson 3.